Imagine it for a moment. The thing we call a calendar is only just beginning to spread. Maps cling to the seas with rough lines, and news travels by mounted messenger. And at the very center of the world, there is one emotion above all others: expansion, land, power, and story. All of them fit inside the same word. I'm not telling you this from far away. It's as if we're walking shoulder to shoulder, because if I had lived in the age of Alexander the Great, I wouldn't have simply grown old in a single city. In that era, people either stayed on the frontier or they expanded the frontier by walking it. I would have chosen the second. From the rocky slopes of Macedonia to the salty winds of the Aegean, from the valleys of Anatolia to the narrow throat of the Cilician Gates, from the Syrian coastline to the green artery of the Nile, from the hot plains of Mesopotamia to the sharp cold of the Iranian highlands, from the passes of the Hindu Kush to the misty banks of Indian rivers. On this journey, every place would have its own language, scent, and soil. And at every stop, I would find myself thinking, can this world truly fit inside a single empire? Now I'm going to tell you about a lifetime lived in Alexander's shadow, what I saw, how I survived, the cities, roads, and people of that age, documentary in detail, but told from the heart. Channel reminder: if you want more stories like this, history with a documentary feel, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. We truly need you if we're going to keep this going. Chapter 1. My life that began on the Aegean coast. 3 BS. If I had lived in that era, I imagined myself on the Aegean coast in a small harbor town, somewhere in Ionia, where stone houses lean into narrow streets and mornings smell of salt and olives. Because people of the Aegean know how to look outward, the sea keeps the horizon permanently open. My father would likely have been a small trader: wine, olive oil, salted fish. The language of cargo was simple, but the system was strict. Warehouse, seal, scale, tax. In those years, Anatolia was ruled through the Persian Empire's satrapal system. Even the shadow of the great route known as the Royal Road fell across our markets. Official couriers changed horses at fixed stations, carrying news across long distances in a matter of days. To us, this was proof of how vast the state truly was. An empire wasn't felt through its voice, but through its roads and its taxes. As a young man, I would have learned 2 languages at once: Greek in the marketplace and an administrative language close to Persian for official matters, plus scraps of Phoenician trade jargon picked up from sailors. In a harbor, you meet people, those who bring linen from Egypt, copper from Cyprus, timber unloaded from Cilicia. You don't learn geography from a book, you learn it from cargo. At first, Alexander's name would have arrived like a rumor. We heard that Philip in Macedonia had brought the Greek cities into line and forced a new order called the Corinthian League. When we heard Macedonian, we didn't think of refined philosophy. We thought of a disciplined wall of spears. The phalanx, an army marching behind long spears called sarissas, a kind of military technology powerful enough to change even the fate of a young man born by the sea. Then came 336 BC. Philip was killed. Alexander, still considered young, took the throne. And at that moment, what people talked about in harbor cafes changed. The issue was no longer tax rates. It was the direction of the continent. Because a young king has 2 choices. He either suffocates inside his own borders or he grows beyond them. Alexander chose growth. In my story that year, I would leave my town with a caravan into the interior, toward Sardis, toward the Phrygian plain. On journeys like these, you see Anatolia's real face. The coastal strips are lively, but as you move inland, the plateau hardens, the wind dries out, and nights turn cold. Roadside inns, wells, and temples are not stops. They are life insurance. And then one day, the news arrives. Alexander has crossed the Hellespont from Europe into Asia. That thin line of water opens like the door to an age. Chapter 2, From Anatolia to Cilicia, The Geography of War, 334 to 3 BC. My entry into Alexander's army wouldn't happen the way a common soldier is recruited. It would happen through necessity. As an army advances, it needs translators, scribes, people who understand weights and measures. Coming from a harbor background, I would carry both language skills and the discipline of trade. So instead of swinging a sword, I would witness the army's life mechanism up close. Provisions, water, animals, roads. The crossing of the Hellespont is by itself a display of engineering and morale. Crossing that narrow strait is not only changing continents, it is erasing the idea of return from the mind. Then comes the region around the Granicus, northwestern Anatolia, where riverbeds are slippery and horses stumble. The stage of war is geography. If water rises, the phalanx breaks. If the ground turns to mud, the cavalry loses its speed. The cities of western Anatolia respond one by one. Some open their gates, some resist. In the siege of Halicarnassus, you see how stone walls test the human will. Coastal cities breathe through the sea. In a siege, if they have support from the sea, they live. If they don't, they slowly fade. A siege is war in its most everyday form. Trenches are dug, battering rams prepared, supplies counted, disease begins to appear. The parts history books rush through are in reality days of sweat and patience. Then you turn south, toward Cilicia. Here, nature tightens like a gate. The Taurus mountains rise, the passes sharpen. Picture the Cilician Gates, rock on both sides, the sky reduced to a thin strip. Passing through there, you understand how fragile an army can be. A landslide, an ambush, a narrow choke point, and an imperial dream can be strangled. As you approach Issus, the air changes. Mediterranean humidity, the warmth of valleys, and a narrow strip of coastline. Sea on one side, mountains on the other. In a place like that, numbers matter less. Order and command matter more. I would remember the Battle of Issus as the moment a person becomes alien to themselves, because once it begins, you don't see individual faces. You see shield edges, dust, shouting, the screaming of horses. Then silence comes. When the battle ends, nature is still nature. Birds return, wind blows, but people remain on the ground. That day, word spreads that Darius has fled. The center of the Persian world is shaken. But the most important thing is this. From this point on, the war becomes not only military, but political. Alexander begins to act not as a king, but as a builder of order. Chapter 3, Tyre, Egypt, Babylon, walking into the heart of the world, 330 331 BC. When we descend to the Mediterranean coasts, the map widens and culture becomes denser. The Phoenician cities, Tyre, for example, a city married to the sea. Taking Tyre is not simply taking a fortress, it is unlocking the seal of maritime trade. The siege drags on, and here engineering moves ahead of history. A causeway is built into the sea. The island is tied to the mainland, writing history by laying stone in water. When you see that, you understand that the word impossible is always negotiating with human will. Then Egypt. When you enter Egypt, the world changes color. After the brown stone of Anatolia, the green of the Nile dazzles the eye. The Nile Valley is like a miracle, desert around it, but life overflowing beside the river. Here, cities live not only through stone, but through ritual. Temples are not just places of worship. They are centers of knowledge and power. Where Alexander establishes Alexandria, even the direction of the wind is calculated. The harbor, the closeness to the delta, the flow of trade, it is city planning. An anchor thrown into the future. I would stop there and think, this man isn't only conquering, he is leaving a mark. The journey to the Siwa oasis is an entirely different scene. Moving through the desert is not something an army is used to. Sand hides water. The horizon deceives. When you reach the oasis, the silence is heavy. They say Alexander sought divine approval there. I would see it as both propaganda and inner belief. Because great powers don't stand by the sword alone. They also stand by story. And then you march into Mesopotamia. As Babylon approaches, the air is hot, the land flat, the sky vast. Here, even the wind blows for a long time without changing direction. The flatness of Mesopotamia is also suited for war. Great armies can deploy, cavalry can maneuver. On the road to Gaugamela, it feels as if everything has been prepared for a great collision. After Gaugamela, Babylon. I would remember Babylon less as a city and more as a system. Canals, warehouses, markets, scribes. The people who keep records matter as much as stone walls, because an empire needs a ledger as much as it needs a sword. Taxes, grain, soldiers' pay, logistics. Without these, conquest is only a brief flash. In these cities, I would see Alexander positioning himself not only as a conqueror, but as an heir. Persian court protocols, relationships with local elites, the reappointment of satraps, a documentary truth. It's easy to take a geography. Governing it is a separate science. Chapter 4. Iranian Highlands, the Hindu Kush, and the Weight of Return, 330-323 BC. When you march east from Babylon, the climate hardens. The Iranian highlands teach you what altitude truly means. By day the sun burns, by night the cold bites. Reaching Persepolis is not simply reaching one of the Persian capitals. It is entering the ceremonial center of an empire. Columns rise. Stairway reliefs depict foreign delegations. Stone becomes the propaganda language of history. Then the east grows even harder. Bactria and Sogdiana, the region of today's Afghanistan and Central Asia. Here, war is not fought in open fields, but on mountain edges and in valley passes. Local resistance exhausts the army with a run-and-return tactic. Geography is not neutral here. The mountain becomes the rebel's shield. Even as a scribe, I would feel this fatigue. Records increase, losses grow, supply lines stretch longer. The passes of the Hindu Kush. That is where an empire's breath narrows. Icy wind, thin air, animals stumbling. Crossing a pass can be harder than taking a city. People carry loads, tents tear, feet crack. Here, history is not only heroism, it is endurance. As you approach India, the world changes again. Humidity rises, vegetation thickens, rivers widen. Encountering elephants by the Hydaspes, Chelem, is something Macedonian warfare is not accustomed to. An elephant is not an animal. It is like a moving wall. In that battle, alongside discipline, I would also see fear of nature. A human fears what they do not know. And then comes the most human scene. The army wants to stop. People who have marched for years begin thinking of home. Perhaps Alexander's hardest moment is this, because conquest is not only managing the forward march, it is also managing the return. On part of the return, deadly regions like the Gedrosian Desert are chosen. Their water is worth more than gold. Sandstorms erase direction. A large part of the army is lost, not in battle, but in nature. In this chapter, I would tell you about the cost behind history's bright pages, lips cracked from thirst, wounded men who cannot be carried, possessions left behind, and finally, the return to Babylon. 323 BC. The city looks like the same city, but the people are not the same. When Alexander's death arrives, I would feel it not as an ending, but as the beginning of a breakup, because a vast geography held together by the will of one man naturally leans toward fragmentation when that will is removed. If I had lived in that age, in my old years, I would sit in a harbor city, looking at the sea, and tell you this: Alexander's world expanded the map, but it also expanded the human burden. Empires build roads, but the footprints on those roads often fill with pain. Closing, final reminder: if this journey pulled you in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Your support truly matters if we are to continue with storytelling like this. In the next story, let's open time together once again.